Welcome to WIBW's Candidate Forum, featuring the candidates in the state's 2nd Congressional District, moderated by Melissa Bruner.
Good afternoon and thanks for joining us for our special Decision 2024 coverage. You will be hearing from the candidates vying for the Kansas 2nd Congressional District seat on the issues important to you. This is an open race. Incumbent Jake LaTurner is not seeking re-election. You will see 3 candidates on your November ballot. All 3 are here in the studio with us. Democrat Nancy Boyda is running to return to Washington. John Hauer represents the Libertarian Party, and Republican Derek Schmidt working to return to public office. Thank you to all 3 of you for joining us this afternoon. Here's how we'll be moving through our forum. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement, and we'll reserve time for each to give a 1-minute closing statement. We'll limit answers to questions to 1 minute each. We are using alphabetical order to determine the order, alternating who goes first and second and third. Which brings us to our opening statements, beginning with Nancy Boyda.
Thank you. All the things that are important to the 2nd District of Kansas, like health care and groceries, the cost of housing, our southern border, all of that, nothing is being done in Congress. It's so broken and so dysfunctional. But I think that there are solutions. And I believe that they're not at the extremes, but they're at the center. And I have been a strong, independent Kansas woman for 18 years, breaking with my party whenever I thought that that was an important thing to do. Of the Kansas delegation, I was always consistently ranked right in the center, the closest to the center. But Derek Schmidt, not so much. After the 2020 election, he did the unthinkable. And he dragged Kansas into the debate and tried to overturn the election. By the grace of God, the Supreme Court threw out the case, and it didn't happen. But does anybody believe today that Derek will have the courage and the leadership and the strength to stand up to Donald Trump? I don't believe that he does.
Thank you. John Hauer.
My fellow Kansans, we live in a country full of broken people and broken systems. The healthcare system, the education system, our whole food system, it's all broken. I don't think that government is the answer. I believe that we should put our faith in each other, in our friends, in our families. I don't think that we should put our faith in Donald Trump. I don't think we should put our faith in Kamala Harris. Even Chase Oliver, he's got some great ideas, but he's not going to save us. None of us up here is going to save you. We have to help ourselves and help each other. The government is not going to be your answer. So I ask you to join me in fighting the system, helping each other out, and being good to each other.
Thank you. And Derek Schmidt, your opening statement.
Well, thank you for joining us. What an honor to be a candidate for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District. America has some serious challenges, and we need serious people who will go and represent the people that live here in the 2nd District as our advocate, as our voice, as we try to solve them and work through them and leave this great country better than we all found it. I've traveled all over this district in the course of this race, listening to people, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their concerns. I've been in all 27 counties at least twice, and some, like Shawnee County, where we are today, many, many more times. And one thing is clear, there are some common concerns that we know must rise to the top of the national agenda. Inflation, the cost of living, the enormous amount of federal spending of money we do not have that's driven up prices and made life much more difficult for Kansas families throughout the district just trying to pay the bills. Our wide open southern border that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris threw open and left undefended. 3 times as many illegal aliens have come in the last 3.5 years as we have people in Kansas. And a nanny state mentality in Washington that thinks they know as regulators how we ought to live our lives in Kansas. I'd like to go and help tackle those problems.
Thank you all. Setting the stage now for our questions. I want to begin with women's reproductive freedom. It's become a major touch point nationally, particularly in the presidential campaign. To what extent would you support a federal abortion ban or, on the other end, putting the protections of Roe v. Wade into federal law? This first question goes first to John Hauer.
Well, like I've said before, this isn't one I like to argue about because no one's mind has ever been changed by arguing about abortion. Just saying. But I am 100% pro-life. I'm Catholic and proud of it. And I would support anything I could do to defend the lives of unborn babies.
Thank you. Derek Schmidt.
Well, I am pro-life. I have been all of my public career. It's what I personally believe. I think we're at a point in American history where these decisions are going to be debated and decided among our citizens on a state-by-state basis. Kansas has had a debate here. People voted 2 years ago, and I said immediately after that we have to respect the results of that vote. And I think that to the extent there's going to be more discussion, it's going to happen in places like Kansas and in every state around the country. There may be some things that we have consensus on where there ought to be federal action. For example, for more than 30 years we had bipartisan agreement, Democrats and Republicans, that we ought not have federal funding of abortion services. President Biden tried to walk away from that commitment. I think we ought to codify that commitment and make it the law of the land. I think that's something we should all be able to agree on. So too with very late term procedures like partial birth abortion. But generally, I think this is in the purview of the states and the citizens to work through as the proverbial laboratories of democracy at this point in our history.
Thank you. Nancy Boyda.
Thank you. Derek, I don't remember things that way. You actually said after the vote that the discussions are not over, and with Kansans for Life, you vowed to overturn the will of the people. It was 18 points that women and men made their voice heard. And Derek, that is not what you have been doing. And so it's nice for you to say things now, but the fact is no one trusts you to actually be able to do the right thing when it comes down to it. So I believe that the federal government and all government needs to get out of my bedroom, out of my doctor's office, and get out and stay out. And I believe that I'm not going to fight for Kansas women and then turn around and have our sisters in Georgia and Louisiana and Texas die because somebody in Washington, D.C. thinks that it's okay to do this state by state. So Derek, you and I couldn't be further apart on this.
Appreciate all your answers. We will now take a look at border security. Candidates on all sides are saying we need to address this issue. Everybody's saying it, but what specifically would you do to secure the border and address immigration in the U.S.? We begin on this one with Derek Schmidt.
Well, you don't have to be very creative to figure out what to do first. You go back to where we were just 3.5 years ago before President Biden and Vice President Harris undid the Trump border policies and threw open the doors. As I said before, we've had, by the official numbers, and we've missed a lot of people, we've had more than 3 times the population of the entire state of Kansas come across our border illegally over the past 3.5 years. So we have to go back to where we were as a starting point. I think certainly the so-called remain in Mexico, the catch and release policies have to be reinstated. We know that they worked previously, and we know that executive action can make a difference because when President Biden decided during an election year just a few months ago that he would act, it actually has made a difference in the border numbers. Now there is a bill that came out of the House this last year, H.R. 2, that is very strong on border security. I would have supported it. I think it makes a lot of sense to see where we can shore up the law. But what we really need is a president who is dedicated to enforcing the laws we have on the books and closing our border.
Thank you, Derek Schmidt. Next, we go to Nancy Boyda.
So 18 years ago, I stood against my party, even went into the Judiciary Committee, the Immigration Subcommittee, when my party was in the lead. And you can read my testimony online, and I said, please, we have to secure the border now. So I have been there for 18 years. Was I happy with what was going on at the border during President Biden's, when he did? No, I wasn't at all. I believe that first of all, we have to secure the border. First of all, very first of all, we need to make sure that any drug cartel member who is bringing anything in that's going to hurt our families, they need to be deported immediately. And then we need to start talking about this bipartisan bill. And I will call on Jerry Moran to go together really arm in arm and say, Jerry, let's get this bipartisan bill that has never come to the House floor. Let's the Senate and the House, Republicans and Democrats, and let's go show our kids and our high schoolers what it looks like to have a Republican and a Democrat actually work together. And I believe that we can pass a bipartisan bill that begins with border security.
Thank you. And finally, on the issue of border security, John Hauer.
Well, this one's complicated. First of all, I don't believe in treating anybody inhumanely, so there's that. I do believe in securing the border. Some libertarians would disagree with me on that, but I think at this point in our country, we really need to. But it's so complicated because there's a lot of other things that tie into it. There's the welfare system, there's the healthcare system, there's the education system, and I mean, even in Kansas here, there's the agricultural system that these things are all tied together. So I'm not the expert on this, and my plan would be to get with people who are experts on this and ask them what they would do and advise me on this.
Thank you all. The next question has to do with the Farm Bill. The current bill has expired. We've yet to see a proposal advanced for debate. This contains not only crop insurance and support programs for farmers and ranchers, but also environmental and conservation initiatives and food assistance programs. What do you feel must be in a new bill, and where are you willing to compromise to get an agreement passed? We go first to Nancy Boyda.
Well, thank you. So the Farm Bill is so important to Kansas, and we need to have clarity sooner than later. So in the lame duck, whoever wins this election needs to get their act together and get this farm bills passed so our farmers and ranchers, our farmers, can know what to be planting now. It's not going to be helpful to know in 4 months from now. So when I was in Congress before, I was on the House Ag Committee with Jerry Moran, and we came up with a bill. The headline that I put out said that it was good, not great. How do we compromise? When it talks about the conservation measures that Derek is so concerned about, we have too much conservation measures in there. I'm not sure that I would agree with him. When it comes to climate change, if you look at our energy policy, we are the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. We have more natural gas fracking going on than we ever have. So let's look at what we need to do to bring renewable energy into Kansas. It's good for our jobs. It's good for our economy.
And
is that a compromise?
Time. John Howard next.
So, speaking of farming, there is a great book. If you are at all interested in farming or a farmer or thinking about it, it's called You Can Farm by Joel Salatin. And wonderful book. It even goes into like the philosophy of farming and goes way past techniques. So when it comes to farm bills like this, I would usually support less regulation, first of all. Anything we can do to let farmers do their job, let's do that. I would also believe that we need to not subsidize as much. I think the government getting involved in that is always a bad idea. And I know it can't happen all at once, but I think less regulation and less subsidization will help in the long run.
Thank you. And finally, Derek Schmidt.
Well, Congress needs to get a farm bill in place. So we're on these temporary extensions. I'm hopeful that after the election, the current Congress can get a farm bill passed. If not, I hope it'll be first on the agenda in those early days of the next Congress when we get back to kind of move forward. In my view, the Farm Bill ought to be first and foremost about farming and ranching and production agriculture that is so important to us here in Kansas. I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race endorsed by the Kansas Farm Bureau and endorsed by the Kansas Livestock Association. So I'm dedicated to getting the job done. The reality is, in a country that is a majority urban and where most folks in Congress don't have a direct tie to production agriculture in the land, you have to build coalitions to get things passed. That's why there's food assistance in the Farm Bill. It's actually about 70% of the total cost of the bill. That's why there are things like climate provisions. The question was actually, where would you be willing to compromise? And my view is, we start with the production agriculture provisions that are so important to Kansas farmers and ranchers. We add only those things that are absolutely essential to get to the votes in order to pass the bill so we can get certainty out on the farm.
Appreciate your answers on that. We move next to small businesses. It's no secret many are struggling with increased costs from supplies to wages. We see a lot of policy geared toward attracting and retaining large companies. What support do you suggest for our small businesses? We begin on this one with John Howard.
So, as usual, I think government involvement is detrimental for the most part. So, I think deregulating and letting small businesses do what they have to do to make money would be a start. The list of regulations for businesses are just, it's crazy how many loops they have to jump through just to get businesses started. And it's something that I would like to do personally someday. So I would like to see a lot of red tape removed, and I don't believe in offering government assistance, but what I do believe in is tax cuts. So anything we can do to cut taxes for small businesses, I would definitely support that.
Thank you. And Derek Schmidt.
Well, I certainly agree with John on the importance of cutting through red tape. As I said in our opening comments, I think one of the top issues I hear from people all over the state, including small business owners, is that Washington seems to think it knows best how we live our lives, including how we run our little businesses. And we need to back off the bureaucrats out of DC and let people get out there and compete in the marketplace as we have for many, many generations in this great country. One of the concrete things that we need to do in the next Congress is to extend the 2017 tax cuts, and particularly for purposes of this question, those that apply to small businesses. Some of the tax cuts in 2017 were permanent. Some had a time limit, a sunset, and that sunset runs next year. And unfortunately, a lot of the S corporation, the small business, the individual tax rates where a lot of small business owners pay their federal taxes were sunset. That means if Congress does not act, there's going to be a tax increase on nearly every small business in this state, and I think that's unacceptable.
Thank you. And finally, on the issue of small business, Nancy Boyda.
Well, thank you. So I am right there with both of them saying we do have too much red tape, and we do need to cut some of the red tape. You might have heard that Kamala Harris has said, $25,000 or $50,000 to small business to start with, whether it's for new homeowners, the $25,000 or $50,000. That sounds good, and I understand why she's saying that, but I do not agree. I agree with John that we do not need to be adding more tax dollars into this. Cutting regulations and cutting red tape would be wonderful. But let's get real. What we have, the permanent tax cuts, are the corporate tax cuts for large, huge corporations that are making record profit. And I find it disturbing that I hear people defending that we need to have more tax cuts for these big corporations as if they're poor people who can't figure out how to make anything work. So I would very much disagree with you, Derek, that we need to cut taxes for large corporations.
And
small
time.
ones, yes.
Thank you very much. We need to move on to the next question, and there's a lot of information here. The federal government operates many times, as we know, in the budget process by borrowing money to balance the budget. According to the latest data from the Congressional Budget Office, the deficit's at $1.8 trillion. Once or twice a year, the threat of a government shutdown looms large until a last-minute deal is brokered to avoid the scenario. How and when will the federal government get away from this, or will this style of fiscal management continue into perpetuity? Is it unavoidable? Derek Schmidt, answer first, please.
Well, it doesn't have to be unavoidable. The budget process, while always very difficult because people have many different priorities, the federal budget process actually came close to working back in the 1990s, but now it's so far off track. Budgets get written by a small number of legislators in both parties and in both chambers with the president and his or her leadership sort of at the end under a deadline. That's not an acceptable way to set budget policy for the United States. The question mentioned the $1.8 trillion annual deficit. I think sometimes we get numbed by these numbers. $1.8 trillion per year being spent more than we're taking in. And that's even after federal revenues are up nearly $2 trillion over the last decade, even after the 2017 tax cuts. If you go back and look how much money the federal government was spending in the year immediately prior to COVID, just 4 years ago, we are today spending $2 trillion a year more. That is an unsustainable rate of expenditure growth, and we simply have to get our arms around it, or we'll never be able to catch up and get this budget balanced.
Thank you. Nancy Boyda.
So with the budgeting process, if you notice, there is one side that makes this threat, and they will take it to an extreme. They don't care what they're doing, and so I believe that a vote for me is saying that you're done with all of that craziness in DC. You're done with that craziness. And quite honestly, that is one side. The Democrats have never threatened to shut down the government. That's only the Republicans, and it's ridiculous. But let's talk about deficits. With Donald Trump, people, please listen. His deficit was $8.4 trillion. It started ballooning even before COVID. With Joe Biden, it's going to be close to $5 trillion, and I believe that $5 trillion is way too high. A lot of it comes from these corporate tax cuts that Derek has supported over and over and over, and it's just like the Brownback's tax cuts. They raise inflation, they raise our deficits, and none of it trickles down.
And time, yes. John Hauer, finally.
So this is where I have a huge problem with both Republicans and Democrats. So, Republicans get control and they want to spend money on, let's say, military. So budget goes up. To get the Democrat votes, they say, okay, we won't cut funding to Democrat things. Okay, budget goes up. Democrats get in control. They want to fund schools and, do Democrat things. And to get Republican votes to pass it, they have to say, well, we're not going to cut the stuff you like. So budget goes up. And it's just up and up and up and up, no matter who's in control. I wish I could see an end in sight. Vote third party.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. It is about the conflict between Israel and Hamas. We have seen it continue to escalate. What role should the U.S. be taking? How do you balance the civilian concerns in particular for both Israel and Palestine? Let's begin this question with Nancy Boyda.
Well, I've been on the stage with Derek Schmidt so much, so I know that he's going to say that he's behind Israel 100%. Well, I want to tell you who I'm behind. I'm behind the safety and security of my own family. And of course, that means yours as well. So I believe that we need to do everything to get this war over, but we cannot stop there. There has been a two-state solution, people. For 60 years, we have had the answer. But both sides, this is what extremism does. Both sides have dug in for 60 years and said that the other side doesn't have the right to exist, both sides. The United States needs to do everything it can. China is already working with Russia and working with Iran. Everyone needs to come to the table and say we are heading literally to World War III if we don't. We have to use this opportunity to go after a two-state solution. Maybe Derek Schmidt is okay with Armageddon, but I'm not.
Thank you. John Hauer.
So, to all of you watching the news, there's a great book out there called Stop Reading the News. And because of it, I don't really watch the news very much, but I do know a little bit about what's going on overseas there. And I will say that I do not support sending money in any way. I do not support what Israel is doing. In fact, 0% what they are doing. I don't think we should be sending them any money, any weapons, just cut it all off immediately. I believe this will cause a quicker end. Usually when you're giving countries free money and free weapons, they will use them. So the less we send over there, the better. And I'm all for peace. I'm all for stop funding all these wars. Let's get out of it and stay out of it.
Thank you. And Derek Schmidt.
On October the 7th, a year ago, hundreds upon hundreds of terrorists poured over the southern border of the state of Israel and slaughtered more than 1,000 people, including many U.S. citizens. Most of them were young people or kids who had gone out for the weekend or a day at a music concert. That is the equivalent of Israel's 9/11. And I believe Israel has a right to defend itself, just as America had a right to defend ourselves after the attacks on 9/11/2001. Israel's our closest ally in the Middle East. That is strategically important to the security of our country. And they stood with us even when it was difficult after 9/11, when we were fighting in their neighborhood. We ought to stand with them now, not just because they're our friends, but because it is wrong to appease those who would slaughter others. We should never appease terrorists. I stand with Israel on this.
Thank you all for sharing your insights on a variety of issues and concerns. We now want to give you each 1 minute to make a closing statement. We're going in reverse alphabetical order here, so that means we begin with Derek Schmidt.
Well, thanks for taking a little bit of time to engage in this conversation. This is how self-government is supposed to work, and what an honor and a privilege to be part of it. My name is Derek Schmidt. I would ask for your vote in the election. I would love to represent you and all of us in the Congress from the 2nd Congressional District. Elections are about choices, and this election is about choices that affect you. In this race, you have one candidate from a major party who wants to spend a lot of time talking about the other candidates in the race. I prefer to spend all of my time focused on how we are going to get together and solve issues that affect your daily life. The price of living, government overspending, the security of our communities in the southern border, crime and punishment, overregulation, the things that affect how you live your life. That's what your representative ought to do. I'm Derek Schmidt, and I would ask for your vote to represent the 2nd District in Congress.
Thank you. We now have a closing statement from John Hauer.
So the whole reason I'm up here doing this is to fight the system. And I would ask that you join me in this by refusing to put your trust and faith in a government that has caused most of the problems that we're up here trying to solve. So we have so many broken systems. We've got the educational system. So what I say there is please homeschool your kids. The best way to fight the system is just to remove yourself from it. There's lots of resources out there for you, and your kids will thank you, as I thank my parents. We've got the food system, you know, where companies are poisoning us with seed oils and processed foods. Grow your own food. Get a few chickens or ducks, my favorite. Grow a garden. Remove yourself from the system. Go to the farmer's market instead of Kroger. So what I'm asking everyone to do is to take issues that you can solve into your own hands and solve them as individuals. Let's come together. Let's help our neighbors. Let's help our friends. Let's be there for each other and show each other love. Stay free.
Thank you. Anna, finally, a closing statement from Nancy Boyda.
Solutions are in the center. And what do I mean by that? 3 things. I have shown over and over that I have the courage and the strength and the leadership, break with my party, whatever it's going to take, to work for, not my party, but to work for Kansans. 2, we get dozens of questionnaires in the mail, and these questionnaires want you to promise, hundreds of promises about how you're going to vote. Derek has done all of those. I have done none of them. If you're going to make all the promises, and by the way, we haven't seen any of those, then no wonder Congress is so broken when people have already made promises before they even get there. The 3rd thing with this leadership is Jerry Moran and I did serve together, and I'm going to make Jerry tell me no. I'm going to say, Jerry, we need to get arm and arm, and we need to show the good people of Kansas what it looks like to work across the aisle on immigration, on housing, on health care, on so many things that matter to the good people of Kansas. Thank you.
Thanks to all 3 of you. You have heard now from the candidates. It is up to you, in your hands. In-person advance voting ends at noon November 4th. Polls open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. November 5th, which is Election Day. And any mail ballots must be postmarked by 7 p.m. that night as well. Keep it tuned right here Tuesday night, as well as on WIBW.com and our WIBW mobile app for results as they come in, plus reaction from the candidates. Now, if you still have a question on where your polling place is, maybe you're not quite sure what districts you are in, you can go to myvoteinfo.voteks.org. All of that information is there. Remember, it is your decision, your choice on Election Day. We extend our thanks to Nancy Boyda, Derek Schmidt, and John Hauer, and we wish them the best as they head into this final weekend of the campaign. They might be knocking on your door, shaking your hand. We look forward to hearing from you. Remember, your voice matters. Be heard on Election Day. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.